Welcome to Follow the Medical Record, where healthcare experts give insights into the increasing importance of following a patient's medical record through the health ecosystem with compliance, privacy, security, and efficiency front and center. This podcast is brought to you by MRO and hosted by Don Hardwick, Senior Vice President of Client Relations at MRO. Don has been in the health information management industry for over 40 years and has extensive knowledge of how medical records make their way through the healthcare ecosystem. At MRO, Don is responsible for strategic client engagement programs and overall client satisfaction. To hear from all of MRO's industry experts, be sure to visit mrocorp.com for additional content and to sign up for our monthly e-newsletter. Over to you, Don.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for listening to Follow the Medical Record. I'm your host, Don Hardwick. You can learn a little bit more about me and my background on MRO's website at mrocorp.com and can connect with me on LinkedIn. Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter at MROCORP. We'll be talking to Greg Ford today, who's the Associate Vice President of Requester Relations at MRO, on a great topic impacting hospitals across the country concerning the rising volume of payer audits or reviews as they're known, and why it's occurring and how hospitals are addressing the issue. So Greg, thanks for joining the program today.
Thanks for having me, Don. Just a quick introduction. Again, Greg Ford, Associate Vice President, Requester Relations. And in my role, I act as the liaison between MRO clients and the healthcare insurance companies that we refer to as payers. My team is responsible for coordinating large projects for risk adjustment and HEDIS, as well as ensuring that audit requests are being billed appropriately per the managed care agreements.
Super. Thanks for that intro, for your background, Greg. I really appreciate that. Just as a perspective that may be helpful to our listeners too, Greg, can you tell us kind of the volume of locations that your organization, MRO in particular, and then your group services around the country?
Sure. So MRO currently services over 16,000 locations across the U.S., and that number continues to grow.
And in relationship to that, how is the rise of these audits impacted those locations? In particularly, hospitals make up the bigger portion of that, but still with the physician practices, it's a combination of an increase in the audit approach from payers around the country as well. How are those numbers impacting your department? And more particularly, what has the growth looked like in those audit numbers?
Yeah, so great question. And just kind of put a little bit of perspective, the role that I'm in today, this department did not exist at MRO in 2015. It came into existence in 2016, and it was just me. But based on the rising volume of payer requests for, the different purposes of, payment integrity audits, HEDIS, risk adjustment, the department has grown quite substantially, up through 2021 here. So, the impact, here internally at MRO, but, more importantly to our clients, the volume of payer requests has grown tremendously. And just looking, kind of over the last, 3 years, 2019, we saw over 1 million, payer-related requests. 2020, 1.5 million. And then this year, and the year's not even over yet, we're already at 1.6 million. So we're going to, surpass last year with, 2 full months to go here. So, basically, the volume requests, especially, maybe a provider that doesn't have a release of information company, it's a tremendous burden on the HIM department. Now, MRO will take a lot of that pressure off the clients and coordinate these projects and, again, ensure proper billing for audit requests. So that's, tremendously helpful for, clients that do have a release of information vendor. But, kind of just looking at it, from a percentage perspective, kind of going back to 2015, MRO's, overall, our payer-related requests were about 12% of our overall mix. So that takes into account all the requests that MRO processes for attorneys, for patients, disability, and these payer-related requests. And you kind of look for, fast forward to 2021, that percentage is now 42%. So 42% of the requests we work on are payer-related for risk adjustment, HEDIS, and revenue integrity audits. And just to kind of, just take a step back a little bit, when we talk about, payment integrity audits, they're the requests that the payer is looking to take money back from the provider, on paid claims. So definitely not a provider's, friend there. And then when we talk about risk adjustment and HEDIS, they're more like reviews. So they're not audits. The payer is not looking to take money back, but they are extremely beneficial to the payer. And, there's just no negative financial impact like there is with the audits.
So other than outsourcing, Greg, to an ROI company like MRO, what are the hospitals doing themselves? The volume being what it is, it seems like that is, over the years here, that volume is certainly impacting their labor in order to process these requests. So what alternatives or what other measures are the hospitals looking at other than the outsourcing?
One of the main things that we try to educate our clients on, and I would imagine other providers that don't have release of information service are hopefully considering this, but it's important to work with the managed care teams to ensure that they're putting strong language in the medical records sections of that managed care agreement to make the payer accountable to pay for the records. What we've seen historically, if there's nothing in the agreement that holds the payer accountable, they tend to throw out a pretty big fishing net, and that cost burden then falls to the provider. If they have strong language in there, it at least makes the payer think twice about how many requests they're going to ask for, and it gives the provider an opportunity to recoup the cost and cover what they're putting out there in labor to pull the charts for the for the payer's request. Now, the other thing that we're seeing, and it's becoming a pretty hot topic, is that some providers are considering allowing payers access into their EMR. So that's something that's certainly been a hot topic, and the payers are pushing the providers more and more for that type of access. But providers should be aware that there are certainly risks associated with that, and definitely things they should be concerned about in considering, granting that type of access.
It's a good point. I want to peel back the onion a little bit on that aspect. We've had on the show in the past some topics concerning privacy, security of the hospital's information systems that contains their medical records. And it seems like to me that this may be a little contrary, if you will, to the security and reliability that, from the patient's perspective, that information is not being distributed unnecessarily. I know with the audits that the payers have that right to the information, but do you see problems in relationship to the privacy security from the patient's perspective here?
Oh, absolutely. So, when we talk about, risks and concerns for the providers, privacy and consent is definitely one of the top ones at the list. It shouldn't be assumed that, a patient's consent to share, health records, automatically for, providing continuation of care extends to the payers for whatever their purposes may be. So, privacy and consent is definitely, one of those, top hot buttons and risk and concerns. You also mentioned security. The more access that is out there, that increases the exposure to cyber attacks and exposure to large scale breaches. And, when that stuff gets out there in the news and a provider's name is out there, that it's just not good PR. So, that's security is another, really important area. The other ones that I'll mention is you mentioned, hey, payers have the right, to audit, and that's absolutely right. They should have access to the records. Now, what historically has happened is that HIM has been kind of the gatekeeper. An audit request may go through the revenue cycle department, who turns it over to HIM, and HIM provides, what's being asked for. Again, audits are not good, for providers. And, if these payers have access, what's to stop them from auditing more records? So there's the financial risk and concern of granting, pretty open access to the EMR. That could result in additional denials and recoupments against the provider. So, certainly another area of, risk and concern there. And then finally, I'll say that, there's, granting this access doesn't kind of just, all right, hey, we've granted the access, we don't have to worry about it. It's not set and forget it. There's, somebody has to manage that access from multiple entities and make sure that, it stays up to date. So there's certainly cost associated with, granting access and managing it.
Those are great points, Greg. What other than a reduction in the processing cost for a hospital that's doing the work internally, meaning their hospital staff are processing these type of requests, are there any other benefits to granting that access to the payers from a relationship standpoint with the payers, or from an additional cost savings that the hospital's getting? Or are the concerns outweighing the benefits, I guess is the right way to put this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I don't know that there's a super great answer, but I'll give you kind of, what we've seen in the industry, and, kind of just from, an MRO client perspective as well. So, with value-based care contracts becoming more popular, there's an opportunity for providers to share in, the success of the payer. So that's been driving, a lot of the consideration that providers are giving to, potentially provide access. And, maybe take, some of that pressure off an HIM staff that has to produce the records. Now, if, kind of going back to my earlier point, if the medical record section of the managed care contract is strong, these requests for records, can turn into a revenue generator for the provider. So, yes, you have to expend the labor to generate it, but if you're able to cover your costs and at a decent gross margin, you can generate revenue for risk adjustment and HEDIS requests, and even the audit requests that are being asked to, you can hold the payer accountable to pay for those. So there is definitely things to offset the cost. And we found that for risk adjustment HEDIS, that the payers are reasonable. Those charts are so valuable to them that they will pay something for them to cover the provider's costs, so that it's not a cost burden to them because of the financial benefit that the payers get from getting those charts. There's just a lot to consider, when considering the access and what kind of guardrails you're going to put around that. Will you grant access to just the payer? Will you grant access to their business associate, the third party, which is, we see most of the payers utilize a third party. If that vendor has access, but you've only granted, permitted it for, let's say an Aetna, will they also just go in and pull records for United Healthcare, even though maybe the provider doesn't want them, to have the access? So definitely something that has to be considered. Again, who's going to manage this access as an ongoing process, and what is the cost associated with that? One of the concerns I didn't bring up, but there's HIM concerns, regarding limiting what PHI the payer can actually see. They're only entitled to the records that they were the guarantor for. So, what's to stop them from seeing more than they should? So certainly HIM concerns there. And again, like I mentioned, and I can't stress it enough, the financial risk of potentially more audits, with that, open access.
Greg, I'm seeing just across the industry itself is that there is a push to have more availability to this medical information on patients, both from a continuity of care standpoint, which is completely understandable. A patient's in one part of the state or a country and they travel to another part of the state or country, and they need to have access to that information for continuation of care if there's an accident. So I understand that piece of it. The other side of it is more of a business related use of patient information. And that's where this is coming in, is the business side of the need for that information. From the patient's perspective, is there any benefit in granting this open access to payers for the patient in the settlement of claims or in their premium differential for their insurance premiums? Is there any benefit for broadening the access for these payers?
Yeah, another great question, Don. And totally agree with you that, that access for continuation of care, it just makes total sense in getting the patient the treatment that they need. Now, when it comes to, the payer and having that access, I guess I'll answer your question about the patients first and then talk a little bit more about, what we've seen. The payers, will say that, hey, look, we want access to manage costs, improve engagement with providers. They'll say, we want to help members make better healthcare choices. So that is a potential plus. Now, in my experience in working with, a couple different insurance companies, just from a personal perspective, I don't know that the payers have quite gotten, the medical record thing right. It seems they're trying to do one size fits all, and it doesn't seem to work well from my personal experience. Much different than the experience I've had with providers that are sharing, records with patients through, maybe an Epic Care Link or an Epic Patient Portal. I think the providers do it much better. The payers haven't quite gotten there, in my opinion. Now, I think at the heart of this, and understandably, the payers are looking really to manage their costs. Most of these payers are large corporations that are beholden to shareholders, and being able to cut out some of the costs will certainly help their bottom line. So I think that's really the primary driver. And hey, if we can improve engagement with providers and maybe improve the members being able to make better healthcare choices, then that's a plus. But ultimately, corporations are beholden to their stockholders, so it makes sense that they'd want to try to cut costs where they can.
Certainly makes sense. I know that just access across the spectrum of companies and entities that want that information, it does pose some additional constraints on the privacy piece for these patients. I'm not sure that the patients understand reality of who's accessing their records and under what circumstances.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Not to cut you off there, Don, but you also mentioned in your question part about the business that's kind of associated with the access, and there's a lot of noise around large corporations such as Amazon and Google wanting to buy this type of data from providers or from payers, because it's an opportunity to sell into the healthcare marketplace. So there's been some studies done, and it's kind of actually scary that even though this information has been de-identified, from being able to match other information on the records, the majority of them were able to be re-identified, and that patient was no longer, kind of masked at that point. So definitely, would be a concern from a patient perspective that their information is being sold out there, and it's not, it's not truly, de-identified.
Yeah, that is a big concern, and I think that as time goes on, just publication of information and how it's being used and under what circumstances is going to be more and more in the news. I completely agree that there is a business need and there is a medical need. It's controlling and managing and having a gatekeeper that's going to help assist in that privacy and under what conditions that information can be disclosed is going to be more and more in the forefront.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%, Don. And I think there's a right way to give access to the payers, and that, with some of the the acquisitions that MRO has done here this year, we're going to have some solutions for our clients that help them provide managed access so that it can remove those HIM concerns or privacy and consent security concerns. So definitely more to come on that, and it's definitely exciting to see how we'll be able to assist our clients further.
Well, Greg, I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule. I know you're very busy, and agreeing to be on the show today. It's been very informative, and I hope that our listeners will also agree. So thanks again for taking the time to be on the show.
Yeah, no problem. It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So for more insight on a patient's medical record through the health system, visit our show's page at mrocorp.com and be sure to explore additional resources and thought leadership on our website. You can also check out our program page on healthcarenowradio.com. Finally, be sure to connect with us on Twitter at MROCORP. Until we talk again, I'm your host, Don Hardwick. Good day.